Cable tier 4 means we now have 30 tier 4 characters. So I wanted to make a new ranking list here for you guys to illustrate the differences between tier 4s and to give you a better idea of which tier 4s you should be focusing on and why, and also talk about which tier 4s maybe you shouldn't focus on, which tier 4s are actually just really good at tier 380 or transcended 80, and all that stuff in between. Now, of course, this ranking is just my personal opinion, and it also takes into account the character's latest uniform, which in the case of quite a few of these characters are seasonal uniforms. So just a standard PSA here, if you do not have the seasonal uniform for one of these characters, then they basically don't exist on the list. They're so far down on the list. I know there's one called less value over here. They are just several tiers below the less value tier. So let's get into it with, unfortunately, the less value tier. Now, this basically comes down to a combination of the characters not being as strong as other characters in the same categories as them, and also these characters not having a lot of game modes where they can shine. So unfortunately, both Ant-Man and Black Widow are in the lesser value. Now, it doesn't mean that they're bad tier 4s. It doesn't also mean that they're bad tier 3s. If I had to rank them, Ant-Man is a better tier 3 than Black Widow. Black Widow really doesn't shine until tier 4. And in my opinion, Black Widow needs a lot more love to be good than Ant-Man does. Like, Ant-Man doesn't even need his artifact to be pretty good, whereas Black Widow absolutely needs her artifact. So, I would say right now Black Widow is the worst tier 4. It's a bit of a shame, but she's also one of the first tier 4s, so it's kind of no surprise that, you know, 28 tier 4s or 27 tier 4s later, she's been power crept. But the other thing you're going to see is that we've seen a lot of speed tier 4s, and we've also seen a lot of male and female speed tier 4s and human speed tier 4s. So that's why they've been power crept a lot harder than the other classes, because or the other types, I should say, because they just have had so many replacement chances, opportunities, whereas universals and blasts haven't, and combats have a similar amount, but not quite as much. So that's why they're sort of sitting down there. Then we get to needs tier 4. So this is pretty straightforward, but the character is not very good until they reach tier 4. Now, it doesn't mean the character is bad. It just means that the character gets a lot from their tier 4. And you shouldn't necessarily, or it's going to be a lot harder for you to get value out of them until they're tier 4. And decent means that they are good, but they're not quite as good as the characters up here at the top, right? They're not quite as good. So that's why they've sort of been down here. And we're actually going to put Ant-Man here, believe it or not. We're also going to put Moon Knight here, and we're going to put Blue Dragon here, the only 3 here. Now, again, there's not really a surprise here, or there shouldn't be as much of a surprise. These are some of the oldest tier 4s we have, right? Like Moon Knight and Iron Man came out basically back to back, and then Blue Dragon was not much longer or later after them. So it's not really a surprise to see these characters getting power crept. In the case of Blue Dragon, very strong tier 4. Her value has slipped quite a bit since we've gotten more PvP tier 4s who just do a lot more and are a lot stronger. When there were fewer of them, she was much more dominant, and when they were more combat focused, she was much more dominant, but she absolutely, like, 100% needs the tier 4. She's very weak at tier 380 in my opinion, or transcended 80. Her tier 4 also does damage, which is a big reason why she kind of needs the tier 4. But in general, characters who have a damage dealing tier 4, like Odin, Thanos, Magneto, Professor X, they're going to get a big bump at tier 4. Some of them can still be good at tier 3, but they do get that big bump at tier 4 with the damage dealing ability. For Moon Knight and Iron Man, it really comes down to what they do. Iron Man right now is not meta for any game mode, so having him at tier 380 is not going to give you much value, and then his tier 4 gives him so much offensive and defensive value, it really covers up a lot of his needs, so there's really no reason if you're not going to take him all the way. And then for Moon Knight, he is good, but he's really only good now for ABX and a little bit of ABL if you don't have some other of these, you know, other these characters that I'm going to cover. And so because of that, because he's only there for those really competitive high-end game modes, you would have to, you know, you'd have to build him to the max. Like, sure, he's not bad at Transcended 80. He's not bad at all. But if you compare him to the level of Transcended 80 and Tier 380 that we have now, which is the next group, you'll see that he falls way short, right? He falls short in damage. He falls short in survivability. And the survivability absolutely gets addressed with the Tier 4, which is why I think he does need it. So next up, we have Tier 3 level 80 gods. Now, this is a little bit tricky. These characters are not necessarily better and I'll discuss which ones are and which ones aren't. Some of these characters are better at tier 4, and some of them are like they're all better at tier 4, but some of them will go to a higher ranking once you get them tier 4. But in my opinion, they're so good at level 80 tier 3 or level 80 transcended that you can stop there. You can absolutely continue, but you can stop there. So Venom is a choice here. Now, some people would argue that he should just be in lesser value, but in my opinion, he's a very strong level 80 tier 3 character, right? He was one of the first that at tier 380 could easily do GBR, and he has enough damage and he has enough tankiness. And although he gets a decent ability with his tier 4 where he ramps up his tier 3, it's just not quite enough to justify the leap to tier 4 in my opinion. But I do still think he deserves at least an honorary mention here. But for the sake of, like, ultimate parity, I will put him down here in lesser value because he technically doesn't have any game modes where he is dominant. Captain America is another one that I think is a fantastic tier 3 level 80 character, but again, a lot of people would argue he doesn't really have any meta value, so you'd put him down here. Sure, we'll do that for now, but just keep in mind that he's also a very, very strong tier 3 level 80, whereas, I mean, Ant-Man's not bad, but nowhere near, and then, these characters not really doing a lot for you at tier 3. But Shadow Shell is a really good example, so she is going to stay there, although she's been replaced by Spider-Gwen. And then Luna, she's a very good example of a tier 3 or a transcended level 80 god. So strong at level 80. Certainly gets more from the tier 4, but certainly not something you need because she's just so good. She could do 99 of Null, right? Stage 99 of a World Boss Legend at tier 380, which is just fantastic. Similarly, I know it's a lot of repetition, but Spider-Gwen, basically the same thing as Shadow Shell, except she's available for more World Boss Legend stages. Very, very strong at tier 380. Professor X, another one, very strong in tier 380. He does gain a lot from his tier 4 with the damage, and he does gain a lot of much needed survivability, but he's very strong as is. Odin, we've seen what he can do, up to 89 Mephisto as a tier 3. He did get nerfed, but he's still very, very strong. Also has an amazing lead. Now, he is a little bit more meta, so I can see some people being like, well, he should be up here because of ABL. Well, or maybe Professor X should be up here because of ABL. In my opinion, this is just how it is. I think they're very strong tier 380s, and I think most players should experience them at tier 380 before taking them to tier 4, before rushing them to tier 4, because they're just that good. We're going to finish up this list here so I can illustrate what I'm talking about here. I'm very aware that Gamora can be meta for ABL, and she's very, very strong for ABX at tier 4. I'm also very aware that Miles is amazing at tier 4 for GBR and World Boss Legend, and we all know how good Summer Luna is. But what I'm trying to illustrate here is these characters are very strong at tier 3. The value that you get so much of their value just by getting them to level 80 tier 3 or transcended. So that's why I want to keep these characters here. I didn't want to flood the top of the list, or not necessarily the top, but I didn't want to flood one of the categories with all of the meta tier 4s and be like, oh, you have to get all these characters tier 4. Because the reality is, and I probably should have said this before we got 8 minutes into the video, you actually don't need any tier 4s. You truly don't. There's like 1 or 2 characters you need tier 4, and here, I'll show you one right now. You need Jean Grey tier 4, and that is because of PvP. But if it wasn't for PvP, you really don't need any tier 4s. It's really the reality of Marvel Future Fight. You can get through all of the content at a very high level, and you can have so much enjoyment in the game without tier 4s. So I'm not making this list to FOMO you into getting tier 4s or to try and make the game seem like it's so hard and you need tier 4s to survive and stuff like that. But just so that you know, that's kind of the angle that I'm taking it with this one. So as far as the one-trick tier 4s go, it's a bit of a weird word, but a one-trick refers to a character that basically is only good at one thing. So this is going to be a little controversial, but I think Star-Lord and Storm are both one-tricks. I think Storm is an ABL one-trick. I think that's basically all she's good at now. There are other things that she's good at, don't get me wrong, but I think other characters just do it better than she does now, right? Either better offensively or defensively or both. And then same thing goes for Star-Lord. I think he's just a one-trick for ABL. He arguably may not be a one-trick depending on how well you can play Odin, but that be like whatever the case may be, I don't really see, like, I know he has some value in ABL, in World Boss Legend as a alien with Weapon Master. I'm fully aware of that, but it doesn't really justify itself and he absolutely needs the tier 4. Like, you're thinking, oh, well, like, if they're a one-trick tier 4, could they be really good tier 3 80s? Like, Storm is a pretty solid tier 3 80, so I was hesitating putting her in here, but I do think she kind of needs the tier 4 for survivability and a little bit for damage. Star-Lord absolutely needs the tier 4 for survivability. Like, he's not here at all. He's not here at all. He would be here if he wasn't meta for more meta for ABL, right? If Odin had surpassed him massively in score, then Star-Lord would be down here. But right now he's up here, I think, in my opinion, because he's a bit of a one-trick for ABL content. But yeah, that explains one-tricks. In this situation, I would still strongly consider taking them to tier 4, but it's not 100% a necessity. For Storm, it's not, because it's definitely not a necessity, because she's been protected by the devs not releasing any other mutant female heroes. But Star-Lord, in his case, like, he doesn't compete with Odin at tier 4, obviously, unless he is also tier 4 for that alien ABL date. He obviously doesn't complete with Thor unless he's tier 4 or very stacked build at tier 380. So they kind of need the tier 4. And then these characters here, they don't necessarily, like, they need the tier 4 for best results, but they don't necessarily need the tier 4, if it makes sense. Well, you gotta kind of go on a case-by-case basis. In Jean Grey's case, she needs tier 4. I'm putting her in PvE. I realize she's very good for PvP, but I'm putting her in PvE to illustrate why she needs the tier 4. She doesn't need the tier 4 for PvP. She needs the tier 4 for PvE because it gives her accumulation, and that accumulation pops every other rotation because it charges so fast that she has it up all the time after her first 2 rotations. So yeah, Jean absolutely needs the tier 4 to dominate in PvE content. And then she's also, like, this is like the most meta characters, and you'll sort of see as we build up the list why they're here. Thor absolutely needs his tier 4, but yeah, he's still quite good for PvE, so I would put him here. Magneto needs the tier 4, also very good for PvE. Basically, if you're going to build him, I would say build him all the way. Black Bolt, same thing, needs the tier 4. I would build him for PvE. But yeah, he needs it. This is sort of maybe the best way to explain this category is that if you're going to build these characters, you should build them to tier 4. It's not that they're bad at tier 3, and I don't want to get into the weeds of, like, he's not good at tier 3, he is good at tier 3. Like, it doesn't really matter that much. It's more like, if you're going to build these characters, and you'll notice a lot of them have seasonal uniforms, then you should just build them all the way, right? You should just go all the way because that's how you're going to get your best sort of investment. Dr. Octopus, another one here, very good at tier 4. But I think you should go all the way. Again, stopping at tier 380 is just not going to give you enough value, I think. Cable, I don't have him at tier 4 yet, so this one's a bit of a guess. This is the only guess on the list for me. I know I don't have half of these tier 4, but Cable's the most one that's a guess to me because I haven't seen a lot of content about him. Like, I've seen tons of content. I've talked to other people that own these tier 4s. I have a much better idea of how good, you know, some of these other tier 4s are. But for Cable, I'm a little bit dicey. Namor, same sort of thing here. Thanos, same thing. And then Sharon. I hesitated to put Sharon here because she's technically not meta for anything. And she's technically very, very strong at tier 380. So you could honestly put her here. And actually, you know what? I will put her here. I think she's a very strong tier 380. I also think she's a very strong tier 4. But she's essentially just for GBR and World Boss Legend. She doesn't have any other value outside of those 2 game modes. 0 PvP value, 0 ABX, ABL value. So it really depends on what you're into. But I'll move her down here just so that these are balanced, because this one was getting a little bit long. And then, of course, the final one, PvP. Again, these characters in general, I would not build unless you're going all the way to tier 4. The PvP list more accurately illustrates what I'm talking about here, because for PvP, you know, stats are king. You need as many stats as possible. You need as much HP as possible, etc., etc. So taking these characters to tier 4 is going to help you. Now, some of these characters can still perform at tier 3, but then they're going to need other things, right? Like if Adam Warlock or Spider-Man or Wolverine is going to perform at tier 3 in PvP, then they need their artifacts, right? The higher the better. 4-star, 5-star, 6-star. Absolutely, right? Carnage by default just needs his artifact. He can't even perform at all without it. To an extent, Wolverine can't as well. But of course, they get a very nice chunk of their damage and their survivability when they upgrade to tier 4. And I think it's a significant amount to justify sort of saying you need to tier 4. That sneeze came on a little bit too strong. So this is the list. This is how it shakes down. Just to reiterate here, I think these characters are best at tier 4, although they may not necessarily need tier 4. But my argument is like they're better off like minimum build and just keep them at tier 3, or maximum build and go all in. These characters are one tricks, meaning they're very good at one thing and not so great at everything else. These characters, in my opinion, are so good at level 80, tier 3, or transcended that you should at least experience them this way for a couple of weeks before you tier 4 them, because it may change your opinion. You may not want to tier 4 them because they're just so strong as is. These characters here are sort of slipping from the meta, and they also need their tier 4 to really, have an effect and have an impact on your roster. And then these characters down here are not really that valuable, and for the most part they are strong at tier 3, but sometimes they need the tier 4 to really do anything significant. So yeah, that's how the list breaks down. That's how I see all 30 tier 4s right now. Hit me up in the comments down below. Let me know what you think of the list and how you would rank these characters. Thank you so much for watching. Smash the like button, it helps out the channel. This one right here, not this one. And I'll see you in the next one. Take care.